Alright, in this video, we're going to talk about the cell organelles. We're going to use a plant cell to do that, and I think it's going to help if we kind of just draw a picture to go with it. So here is my big plant cell. We know plant cells are more square. And so on the very outside of a plant cell only is going to be a cell wall. So that was my cell wall I just drew. We'll label that. Right, and that's going to be used for structure and support. Okay, it's going to kind of help protect the cell. Right, the next layer on the outside is going to be the cell membrane. All right, so this cell membrane, cell membrane is this gray piece right here. If you saw the last video, you know that it's made up of a phospholipid bilayer, so 2 layers of phospholipids. And basically the cell membrane is going to control what can go in and out of the cell. The cell wall is only used for support, but the cell membrane is really what can control what can go in and out. Alright, we know that plant cells, when you look at it, you're most likely to see the vacuole. So they have this huge thing called a vacuole. It's going to look kind of like a swimming pool. It's blue. And the vacuole is usually blue-ish in pictures because it holds a lot of water. It can also store some food and enzymes, but vacuole is mainly used for storage. Alright, then we have our nucleus. This is a nucleus. And if you'll remember, this is kind of like the brain of the cell. It's going to control everything about the cell. It has complete control. Alright, inside the nucleus, though, is a small region. We call it the command center of the brain. So the nucleus is the brain. This little piece right here, this is the nucleolus. And this is basically the command center of the brain. And this produces ribosomes. This produces ribosomes. Now, if you remember our notes, ribosomes are those little dots. They're going to be found everywhere in the cell. They're just tiny little dots. And these ribosomes, they make proteins. So, ribosomes make proteins. All right. Let's see here. Running out of colors. Let's use pink. All right, so right next to our nucleus, you're going to see something. It kind of looks like tunnels. This is an ER. Now, we know we have 2 ERs. One of them has ribosomes on it. So here are my ribosomes all over this ER. So this is actually the rough ER, which just makes sense, right? It's rough, it's bumpy. This is the rough ER. Right next to that rough ER, it's going to continue, so the ER is going to continue. But you can see this time there are no bumps on it. It's very smooth. And that is because it's called the smooth ER. Alright, and this smooth ER actually transports lipids. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. One way you can remember that is if you put a lipid like oil or butter on your hands, they're going to become very, very smooth. So the smooth ER is going to transport those lipids. Alright, so let's go back. We have our nucleus, that's the center the brain of the cell. The nucleolus is the command center of the brain, and this actually produces the ribosomes. Now my ribosomes are all these little dots. Okay, we got a bunch of dots right here. All right, these ribosomes' job is to produce proteins. I'm going to write that off to the side because that is super important. Ribosomes make proteins. And if you think about this, it just kind of makes sense. So, right, our rough ER is bumpy because it has the ribosomes on it. And if these little dots, these ribosomes, make the proteins, the rough ER's job is to transport those proteins. So ribosomes, these dots, make the proteins, but the rough ER transports those proteins. It's going to move those proteins down. The smooth ER, on the other hand, is going to transport those lipids. Okay? All right. Something else you may see in the cell is the Golgi body. And so the Golgi body, it really looks like a stack of like floppy pancakes. All right, this is the Golgi. You may see it as Golgi apparatus. It's the same thing. This is going to sort, package, and distribute materials within the cell or out of the cell. So it could package up things in little vesicles and go ahead and send them through that cell membrane out of the cell if it needed to. You can think of the Golgi body as like the mail center, or like FedEx or UPS or something like that. Okay, we're almost done. We only got a few left. You will see these in plant and animal cells. And this, let me find some room. Usually they have a little squiggle in it. This is called a mitochondria. And the mitochondria is responsible for making ATP. So mitochondria is super, super important because this is what is going to make that ATP. And the ATP is energy for the cell. So without mitochondria, you're not going to have any energy in that cell. Super important for making ATP. Alrighty. Next, we have chloroplast. So chloroplasts are a similar size to the mitochondria. I'll just put one right here. And these chloroplasts, can you all see that? Okay. These chloroplasts, they have little stacks in them. We're going to talk more detail about that later, but these are responsible for making plant food. So we know plants, they need water, they need sunlight, they take in carbon dioxide, and they use all of those ingredients to make their food. And their food is glucose. So chloroplasts make plant food. And that is through a process called photosynthesis. But if you just got plant food, you're good enough for now. Alright, so basically, when the sunlight comes in, these chloroplasts help make the plant food, makes that glucose. That glucose is then going to be sent over to this mitochondria, and this mitochondria is going to break down that glucose into ATP energy. Now, if we are looking at an animal cell, right, an animal cell is round. We do not make our own food. We eat our food. If you think way back to the last unit, we talked about how we get energy from food, and we get our energy mostly from eating carbohydrates. That gives us quick energy. So glucose is a carbohydrate, and so same with our bodies. That glucose is going to go to this mitochondria right here, and it's going to be broken down into ATP. Just remember, animal cells do not have chloroplasts though. All right, almost done. All right, plant cells do not have something called lysosomes, so I'm going to draw it off to the side over here in yellow. because lysosomes are not in plant cells. And lysosomes, I want you to think of like Lysol spray, like that you use to clean with. Lysosomes, they're kind of like the garbage collector. They're gonna clean the cell. They have digestive enzymes to break down waste. So just think they clean the cell. All right, and then lastly, also not in our plant cell, is something called a centriole. There's usually two of them. They're just like little squares. And we're going to talk more detail about them later, but what they do is they aid in animal cell division. So what they do is they just basically help the cell divide. So remember, these two though, these are not in plant cells. These are only in animal cells. Okay? All right. I think that pretty much covers the basics of the organelles.